Good morning. So it's a Sunday morning, 5:20 a.m. at the moment, and I wanted to make something because uh, I came across a situation where I had to practice dealing with situations that had uncertain outcomes. And I think it's a useful tool to be able to deal with situations where you want a certain outcome, but you can only do so much to influence it, right? You can't actually go above and beyond, and the outcome isn't necessarily tied to the amount of effort that you put in. Let me just go into the example. So the situations that I'm talking about are twofold. Number one is I had to recently start my visa application process for staying in the UK as a skilled worker, and visa applications are always a little bit stressful because it kind of feels like you're putting something into a black box and it's not necessarily up to you whether or not you get the outcome that you want. And then the second point is recently I got a letter. I can show you the letter. Recently I got a letter saying that I need to leave the building, the flat that I'm in, and I'm basically getting kicked out because the building has changed owners and I have 2 months to do so. And stuff like that, where things feel like they're not in your control, I find are particularly stressful for me because a large part of the thing that I enjoy about entrepreneurship is that I'm kind of taking back control of my life. Like, that was actually a large part of why I started on this journey, is that I felt like I was letting life happen to me, and by being an entrepreneur, I was able to sort of take more of an active role in the direction that my life was taking. So instances like that force me to confront that initial assumption a bit more thoroughly, and forces me to look at how I operate and how I make decisions so that I can still keep going when times feel like they're getting difficult. And there are a couple of tricks that I guess I use to get past those situations. Number one is really just asking about the long-term direction. So taking a step back from this immediate decision and saying, does this impact the direction of my life and the things that I'm going to focus on? And more often than not, the answer is no, because these are oftentimes one-off decisions. It's very rare that any single thing is going to take out your life and the thing that you actually care about, the thing that you're building as an entrepreneur. Both the visa process and the housing process, ultimately I'm still going to focus on building my business and building a community and making sure that I progress as much as possible so that I can give back as much as possible. So nothing changes there. Number two is looking at past evidence, right? Like, what has happened in the past when it came to situations that could be thought of as stressful, right? Like, when I look back at past instances where I've had to apply for a visa and when I've had to look for a place to live, I have ultimately found a solution. It might not have been the ideal solution. It might not have been, the house that I wanted to live in for the price that I wanted, whatever. But I have found something that could work, right? So the stress comes from the not knowing. But the not knowing it's not a bug. Like, it's not something that should be fixed. It just is the way it is, right? And I think there is a certain amount of surrendering that you have to do to these types of situations, these types of large decisions. The reason housing searches are so stressful, that a lot of people find it stressful, is that it's a multivariate equation where you have to optimize for multiple variables, and the variables aren't laid out very clearly. And it's a seemingly ever-changing landscape before you that changes with time, right? Like, so there's always the chance that next week, for example, there will be another house that is a little bit better, or the week after there's a house that's a little bit cheaper, or a little bit closer to where you want to live. There are all these variables that you have to consider, and there are new options that are constantly being floated on the market. It is also a very irreversible decision, because once you sign up to a house, you have to presumably live there for 6 to 12 months, unless you get kicked out, like I'm getting kicked out. Third point is it's also an expensive decision. The living costs are more often than not, the majority of one's living expenses. So when you take all of that into consideration, the cost of decision making is high. It's an irreversible decision that's going to last a long time, and it impacts your life in a major way. It feels like it should be a hard decision to make. But ultimately, looking back, it's like, what is the cost of a bad decision? Has there ever been a time where I picked a house to live in and it completely ruined my life? The answer is really no. Like, I've lived in some pretty bad places. Like, I've lived in a room that was like the size of a broom closet for like a year, where the bed literally like got in the way of the door. So you'd have to open the door partially, sort of squeeze yourself into the corner, and then close the door because it can open all the way because the bed was in the way. I've lived in places with like cockroaches and like black mold coming out of the air conditioning. I've lived even in the Air Force, right? I was in the Air Force. For those of you who don't know, in Korea you have to kind of do conscripted military service. I was in the Air Force for 21 months, and I lived in a room with 13 other men, like 13 other boys. Like, not ideal. One room, 13 people, bunk beds, seven sets of bunk beds, 14 people in total. Like, not ideal living quarters, but I still managed, right? Like, it might have been a tiny bit more stressful. Like, I might have had slightly less freedom, but I still managed, right? So it's like, when you think about that, when you think about the worst possible scenario, worst possible version of the thing that I'm dreading, and then look at the impact of that. Ultimately, the impact is I'm still here. I am still working on the thing that I care about most, and nothing has changed. Right? So I think a lot of times these decisions, these situations where like you have a specific outcome that you feel like you want, it feels like life or death. But more often than not, it's not. More often than not, what's going on is that we, attach this artificial value to things that we think we want, and then tell ourselves stories that if we don't get these things, then bad things are going to happen. But really, what ends up happening is you kind of deal with it. You deal with it and you make the best of the situation, and you make the best of the cards that you have been dealt. And that's really all you can do. But on the flip side of that, there are definitely situations where you can take control, and you should take control, and you should work towards an outcome that you think is desirable. And those are situations that we also have to face as entrepreneurs. And that's why it's so difficult, right? Like, this game that we're all playing, like, the reason it's so difficult is that you kind of have to play both sides. You have to at once learn how to let go and learn how to take absolute control and accountability of the thing that you're trying to get to. And sometimes you have to do both of those at the same time, right? Like, so I've been growing this community of founders and entrepreneurs, but the amount of value that I can provide to the community is only proportional to what I know, right? Like, it's only ever going to be a subset of what I know to be true. And I'm also finding that while building this community group, the sort of speed at which I'm learning new things has really, really gone down. Like, I'm not really breaking new ground by doing the things that I've been doing. And that's a part of the reason why I'm building this business that is helping entrepreneurs and founders talk to users. The reason I'm doing that is because I believe that taking control of the rate of learning and the amounts of value that I provide to the world is extremely important. And I don't feel like the community group right now is necessarily the best way for me to do that. And also because there are certain things about the startup journey that I don't feel comfortable advising on. For example, like getting funding, right? Like, I haven't yet raised funding on my own. And these are things that I'm going to have to cross off if I'm going to be able to advise other people how to do it in the future. So these are all things that I'm sort of taking into account. And the thing that I'm taking an active role and sort of taking absolute accountability for is the range of experiences that I'm having and the lessons that I'm learning along my journey. And I am willing to pay an incredibly high price. Like, I'm willing to pay basically everything that I make. Like, I'm willing for my burn rate to completely match my earn rate, in order to make sure that I am learning as much as possible, like that I'm gathering as many chips as possible to put in my, memory basket, or whatever you want to call it, put in my skill set, let's say. But that is a very, very different take to something like the visa or the housing or employment or what other people think about me, right? Like, that is a very, very different mindset that you have to have. And I think a part of the game is there are two ways to approach basically every situation. Like, there are two extremes. In a sales call, you can be completely emotional, completely logical. You can be really, really pushy, or just a push over. You can, in a relationship, you can be really loving or completely logical, right? Like, completely emotional or completely logical. You can be completely accommodating or like completely selfish, right? Like, there are these two extremes to most situations, and a large part of the game is figuring out which side to lean on, right? Like, where the balance is that is right for this particular situation, and being able to deploy the right amount of each extreme. Because it's not that you like respond with an 8 out of 10 in emotionality. It's that you mix in 8 portions of emotion and 2 portions of logic, right? Like, it's an active control system. Like, it's like you're making a little potion or something. This might sound crazy, but it really is the way that it feels, because it's deliberate, right? Like, unless you're just like, letting things come out of you, like you just regurgitating a response whenever you come across a situation. It's a deliberate response that you're building. Knowing which toolkit to use for which situation is a really valuable skill to have. So anyways, I went on a massive tangent there, but basically, let go of the situations you can't control that don't impact long-term goals, but take absolute accountability for the goals that you hold, and make sure that you push as much as possible for the outcome that you want in those situations. Have a good one.